What happens if the business, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out and I need to sell the franchise? How does a sale of a franchise work? And what happens if you do want to sell your franchise? And I think somebody that's coming into franchising, before they sign the dotted line, you need to know what the steps are. It's inevitable in any franchise network that there are going to be franchisees that sell the business. We need to be aware, and you need to be aware, if this does happen to you, what the steps are for selling your franchise. Hey everyone, welcome to Courtside Conversations. My name's Emile, founder and owner of Little Boomers Basketball, and it's a pleasure to be your host today. Wherever you're watching today's episode, I hope you're having a booming day, and yes, the pun is intended. My journey to entrepreneurship started on May 1st, 2018 when I launched my first basketball program with 9 kids enrolled. Today, thousands of kids across Australia are thriving in our programs, all thanks to the commitment and passion of our incredible franchisees. This podcast is here to give you real, straightforward, no BS insights into business, entrepreneurship, and what it's like to own a franchise. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Welcome back, everybody, to the podcast. Now, a question that I'll get during when I'm speaking to somebody interested in franchising, I'll get this, Emile, I don't want to be negative. Of course, this is not my intentions, but what happens if the business, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out and I need to sell the franchise? Do you buy it back? Do we buy it back? Do we get our money back? What happens here? And whenever I'm speaking to someone about this, they get a little bit awkward because I think they're trying to make a good impression that they're coming into the business for the right reasons. So what I want to do in this podcast is I want to address how does a sale of a franchise work and what happens if you do want to sell your franchise. Now, when I started my own franchise company, I had no idea, to be honest, how selling a franchise works. I wasn't aware of what the steps or procedures. Now that we've gone through a couple of resales, I know exactly what the step-by-step procedure is. And I think somebody that's coming into franchising, before they sign the dotted line, you need to know what the steps are. A good business person, we all know Murphy's Law, takes into account every exit. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And you have to come up with a game plan should that happen. Because the reality is, before I franchise, I said I'm going to keep all my franchises for 5 years. I'm going to make sure everyone stays on forever. But the reality is sometimes it doesn't work out for whatever reasons. Maybe the franchisor brought on the wrong franchisee. Maybe it wasn't as the work expected. Maybe the franchisee had a change in circumstances and they can no longer operate the business. It's inevitable in any franchise network that there are going to be franchisees that sell the business. Now, I thought beforehand, this is impossible. I'm never going to let that happen. But you can't control worldly circumstances. The best I can do as a franchisor is make sure I vet the franchisee before they come into the network to make sure they're the right person, and then help and assist and support them for their success. And I remember I had this one phone call. We had a franchise, people come in and they were lovely. They were a great family. And in such a very short period of time, they grew their area to 100 enrollments in literally 6 months. They were what we call model franchisees. They were at their classes. They were engaging with their community. Parents were loving them. We're getting 5-star reviews. They were exploding Little Boomers in their area. And then, out of the blue, I get a phone call. Emile, I need to speak to you. I'm like, okay, what could this be about? And I had no idea what it'd be about, to be honest with you. Emile, look, we're going to be selling the business. We've had a change in, personal circumstance. I won't go into detail. We've had a change in that, and now we have to sell the business. And I was completely shocked because out of all the franchisees in our network, I never thought that this family would want to sell their business. Number one, because we vetted them so thoroughly and we really thought they were going to make great franchise candidates. And number two, they were killing it. It had nothing to do with underperformance. Most franchise resales comes from underperformance. They were absolutely killing it. So it caught me off guard. But then I realized and I come to my senses and say, okay, sometimes, life circumstances happen and these stuff, they do happen. And we need to be aware, and you need to be aware, if this does happen to you, what the steps are for selling your franchise. So the first thing is it's okay. Don't freak out. This stuff always happens. What I recommend for you is you want to look for trends in a network. So for example, if you notice a lot of franchisees are selling their areas in a network, you want to find out why. Now, if a lot of those reasons are maybe because of underperformance, like I'm talking like more than 50% are underperformance, or maybe there's a bit of a disconnect between the franchisor and franchisee and they're not receiving the support that they're getting, then I'd probably investigate a little bit more to see what the red flag is here. But if it's one or two about underperformance or it didn't work out, then you need to understand that that's totally fine. So make sure you're looking for trends. The other thing I want to mention before I get into the steps is if you're looking to come into a franchise like you are in a real estate property and you're like a flipper, you know people that come into real estate, they buy something low, they fix it up and then they flip it. Guys, don't buy a franchise. Anybody that's coming in a franchise for the short term is going to make short-term shortcuts. I always believe those that are in it for the long run make better business decisions because they are thinking of the future. They are long-term thinkers and they're not short-term thinkers. I guarantee you, if you're just looking at buying and flipping, you're going to take shortcuts in the business. So don't do that. Okay. And the last thing I want to mention before I go over the steps is here's the beauty about buying a franchise. It goes back to my point I just mentioned before. If you buy like an area that's not doing too well at all, like the franchisee didn't give it the love and attention that it needed, and let's say you bought it at a good deal because there wasn't much business going on in the area, say $30,000, and you put your heart and soul into this franchise and you pump it up, you've got a big clientele, you've got great retention rates, and 5 years later, you go to sell it, you can sell it for a much higher price, say $80,000, $90,000, $100,000, whatever you get the business evaluated, and you can pocket the profits on the sale. That's the really good thing about buying a franchise. You can actually increase the value of the business by the work that you do in the daily grind. How good is that, knowing that you can pick something up, make it great, pump it up, get revenue, get profits up, get business going, get good customer relationships, and then sell it and gain the profits. That, in my opinion, is one of the best things about capitalism, where you actually have control over your destiny. How good is that? Okay, so here are the process if, for whatever reason, you do want to sell your franchise. Step number one is you need to get it evaluated by an accountant, right, to evaluate how much you're selling the business. Hey, just quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode, it will mean the world to me if you can leave a positive review or share it with a friend that may benefit from this. I've also put some bonus resources in the description, including a real franchise case study that you can download under our Franchise Success Blueprint. Hope you find it useful. Enjoy the rest of the episode and rock on. Adios. Now, in this type of example, you go to your accountant, they'll ask for revenue, they'll ask for P&Ls, and then they will give you a rough estimate of how much the business is worth. You have to get it properly evaluated. You can't just pluck out a figure out from your head. And to be honest, when franchisees are reselling their business, they tend to exaggerate the numbers to get a bigger sale. You got to make sure that you get it properly evaluated by an accountant. Now, once you've got the business evaluated and you've come up with a sales price, the second process that needs to happen is called the first right of refusal. Now, when I heard this language, I said to my lawyers, what the heck, can we just break it down into simple language? Lawyers love to use big jargon to confuse you because, it makes them sound fancy. First right of refusal, all that means is the franchisor gets the first right to buy the business back if they want to. Okay, they're the first buyer. So for example, if somebody wants to sell if you want to sell your franchise, you get it evaluated, then you go to the franchisor and say, look, as part of my first right of refusal, I would like to sell the business. I'm offering it to you for X amount of dollars. Would you like to buy it? And that is in most franchise agreements, the first right of refusal. And it's up to the franchisor. They may want to buy it back from you, or they might not want to buy it back from you. Let's say they buy it back. If they buy it back, then you just execute a normal sale agreement. Now, let's say for whatever reason, they don't want to buy it back, which happens most of the times. You then move to step number 3. Step number 3 is you need to find a buyer. Now, a lot of people get this mixed up thinking that the franchisor has to find a buyer. You actually have to find a buyer yourself. And most people contact a broker, some type of business broker who's got a lot of connections to leads. And you need to scout and search for a buyer. Now, head office might help a little bit internally. If they've got anybody interested in that area, they may assist you. But a lot of the legwork has to come from you to find that buyer. Now, once you have found a potential buyer that says, yeah, look, I'd love to invest in this. Job's not done. Here's the part that people don't understand. You've got to move to step number 4. Head office must approve the buyer. So if you say Joe Blow wants to buy my franchise and he's keen, they need to go, you have to propose this buyer to head office, and it's up to head office whether they want to accept or reject it, because they need to go through the same vetting process that you would have gone through to go into the franchise. Because as you can imagine, if you bring any buyer to the network, you're probably, desperate to sell the business. Your vetting process isn't going to be as thorough. You might propose a buyer to the head office network that might not be a great candidate or might not suit the culture for what you're after as a franchisee. So the head office will put them through the same vetting process. A good franchise network has a vetting process that they all go through, and you will need to propose the buyer to head office and have them vet. Now, if head office says, look, that's awesome, we're ready to go to the next step, then you move to step number 5, which is a sales contract. If they say no and they reject your proposed buyer, they're going to give you a valid reason why, and they're going to tie it back to their criteria. Unfortunately, they didn't pass this criteria and we felt like then you got to go back and you got to find a buyer. So remember that takes a bit of time, right? Finding a buyer, proposing it to head office, that takes a bit of time. Make sure you take it into account. Let's say you have found the right buyer and head office approve it. You then move to step number 5, which is a sales contract. You will need to contact a solicitor and produce a sales contract for the new franchisee coming in. So whenever you're reselling an existing business, there must be a sales contract to give the deeds over to the new person. Again, you've got to go through a solicitor. They all charge different. You're probably looking anywhere between $1,500 to $5,000. But you as a franchisee are responsible for producing that document, which is a sales contract. Finally, step number 6, once the agreements have been executed, you have found the buyer, head office are happy with the buyer, then you will sell the franchise, the investment to that new buyer. They will pay you the investment, but you've got to remember this. You need to look through your franchise agreement to see what fees are payable by you when the agreement is sold, because a lot of franchise agreements have what's called an assignment fee. It's a fee that goes to head office when you sell your franchise. In our network, it's 10% of the sale price. So if a franchisee sells it for $70,000, $7,000 comes back to head office because we need to reinvest in relaunching that new franchise. So there's an assignment fee and there's a training fee. Remember, the franchisor has to train this new franchisee. They know nothing about the business. They need to go through the whole training procedure that you would have gone through as a new franchisee. So there's an assignment fee and there's a training fee. And depending on the agreement you sign, there might be other fees associated when you have sold the business. So that you don't get caught off guard, make sure you read the franchise agreement for what happens when a business is sold so that you understand all the fees that you need to pay upon sale of the business. And a lot of people don't do that. They just think that, yes, I'm selling the franchise for $100K, I get $100K back in my pocket. That's not true. There's fees that go to head office, and you also got to take into consideration there might be capital gains tax on the sale of the business. Do your homework, do your research. So let me go through the 6 steps with you and then we'll wrap up. Step number 1 is you get the business valuated by a chartered accountant for how much you're going to sell the business. Step number 2, first right of refusal. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one. The franchisor has the first right to buy back the business if they want to. You propose a sale to them. They say yay or nay. If they say yay, you move to a sales contract. If they say nay, you move to step number 3, where you need to find the buyer. Most likely contact a business broker, somebody that's got leads and knows a lot of people and will find the buyer for you. Then step number 4 is head office must approve the buyer. So you've got to propose the buyer to head office. They got to go through their vetting process. If they don't, they'll give you a reason why. If they do, awesome. You move to step number 5, which is a sales contract. You, the franchisee, need to contact a solicitor to produce a sales contract. And then finally, step number 6, the agreements get executed. You most likely need to pay an assignment fee, a training fee, and any other fees. So team, that concludes what happens when a franchisee is reselling their business. I hope you found that useful in kind of understanding if that did happen to you, which you gotta take into account every possible angle when you're coming into a franchise. Know exactly what happens if that is to happen. Now, in my next episode, I want to talk about something interesting. If I were buying a franchise today, here are the 3 things I'd look for before signing the dotted line. Can't wait to get into that episode. Take care. Have a great week. God bless.